Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, left behind more than just music and memories when he passed away. Hidden deep inside his will was a secret clause that no one expected, and it had everything to do with his beloved daughter, Lisa Marie Presley. For years, fans thought they knew the full story of Elvis's fortune and how it would be passed down. But when the truth came out, it shocked even the most devoted followers. What Elvis wrote about Lisa Marie was not only surprising but also deeply emotional. This hidden detail has left fans speechless to this day. Stay with us to find out. The King and His Princess. In the summer of 1968, a new light entered Elvis Presley's world. That light was his daughter, Lisa Marie Presley. From the very moment she was born, Elvis's life changed in a way that even fame and fortune could not match. He was no longer just the king of rock and roll, adored by millions across the globe. He was now a father, and this role became the most precious of all. Lisa Marie was not simply his daughter. She was his only child, his heart, and his reason to smile in moments when the weight of his stardom pressed heavily on him. Elvis had lived most of his adult years under a spotlight that never dimmed. Every move he made, every word he spoke, every stage he stepped on was followed by eyes and ears that demanded more. Yet when Lisa Marie arrived, he finally discovered a kind of peace he could not find in the chaos of touring, recording, and performing. To the world, he was a legend. To Lisa, he was simply daddy. That truth gave him a joy no concert or award could ever provide. At Graceland, where the halls had echoed with music and the laughter of friends, a new sound filled the air. The gentle cries and soft giggles of Lisa Marie. Elvis often carried her around the mansion, proudly showing her off to anyone who visited. He would kneel beside her crib, sing to her in the quiet of the night, and hold her in his arms as if the world outside no longer mattered. To those who saw him in these moments, it was clear that his fame faded into the background when he was with her. The spotlight belonged only to Lisa. Elvis's playful side came alive in fatherhood. He loved to make her laugh, pulling silly faces, bouncing her on his knee, or sneaking into her nursery just to surprise her. His protective nature was just as strong. Even with a staff of helpers at Graceland, he wanted to make sure Lisa Marie was safe at all times. His adoration for her was so deep that friends often said he seemed like a different man when she was in the room, softer, calmer, and completely devoted. Lisa Marie grew up surrounded by the grandeur of Graceland, but to her it was not a tourist site or a palace. It was home. She remembered the warmth of running through its rooms, the comfort of her father's embrace, and the security of knowing she was the center of his world. She was not lost in the shadows of his fame. Instead, she stood right in the center of his heart. For Elvis, fatherhood was more than just a responsibility. It was a gift he treasured. Every time he looked at Lisa, he saw not only his child, but his legacy, his continuation, and the piece of himself he most wanted to protect. She became the anchor in his storm, the quiet in his noise, the sweetness in a life that was often filled with demands he could not escape. But beneath the laughter and the moments of joy, Elvis carried a silent awareness that his life might not follow the usual path. His health, his lifestyle, and the pressures of fame weighed on him more heavily with each passing year. Even as he played with Lisa, even as he watched her grow, a part of him knew he had to think ahead. He had to prepare for the possibility that his time with her might be shorter than anyone imagined. This thought haunted him, but it also pushed him to act. Elvis was determined to make sure Lisa Marie would be cared for no matter what. His love for her was not only shown in cuddles, songs, and laughter, it was also written in decisions he made behind closed doors, decisions that would later shock the world. To Elvis, Lisa Marie was not just a daughter. She was his treasure, his princess, and his greatest joy. And as he watched her play in the wide halls of Graceland, he quietly promised himself that her future would be secure, even if he could not always be there to protect her. That unspoken promise became the driving force behind choices that would leave fans stunned long after the king had left the stage. The will is written. By the early 1970s, Elvis Presley was at the height of his fame. His voice filled stadiums, his face appeared on television screens, and his name was spoken with admiration all over the world. Yet away from the stage, he was a man who thought deeply about the future. The lights, the music, and the fans gave him joy, but his heart was always with his family, especially his daughter, Lisa Marie Presley. She was still just a little girl, and Elvis knew he had to think beyond the applause of the moment. He needed to plan for the years ahead, even for a future where he might not be there to guide her himself. In the middle of this decade, Elvis began the serious work of preparing his will. Like many who reach great success, he had to consider what would happen to his fortune, his home, and his legacy. For Elvis, it was not just about numbers on paper. It was about the people he loved and how they would be protected after he was gone. Graceland, music royalties, personal belongings, these were not simply possessions to him. They were pieces of his life, and he wanted to be certain they would be in safe hands. Lawyers were brought into Graceland to discuss the details. They laid out options, explained the laws, and asked him where he wanted his estate to go. Family members were also part of the conversation, because everyone understood that Elvis's wealth and name carried a heavy weight. The obvious expectation was simple. Priscilla Presley, his former wife, might receive a portion, while his father Vernon would oversee the estate. And of course, everyone assumed that Lisa Marie, his only child, would one day inherit what her father had built. But Elvis was not a man who left things to chance. He listened to the lawyers carefully, asked questions, and thought through every answer. He understood how fame could attract people who wanted a share of his fortune. He also knew Lisa Marie would be too young to handle such responsibility if anything happened to him too soon. This is where his mind began to work differently from what most expected. Elvis was not just writing a will, he was crafting a shield for his daughter's future. The legal discussion stretched on, with papers drafted and revised. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary. An estate divided, family members accounted for, responsibilities outlined. Yet hidden within those lines, Elvis quietly placed something no one expected. He insisted on a special clause that would protect Lisa Marie in a way that went beyond a simple inheritance. To most, it looked like another piece of legal language. To Elvis, it was the most important part of the entire document. This clause was not discussed openly. It was known only to Elvis, his lawyers, and a very small circle of family members. Outside of that group, no one knew what was tucked away in the folds of the will. Fans who adored him could never have imagined it. Even those close to him who did not sit in on the meetings would be surprised one day when the will was finally revealed. What drove Elvis to make such a choice was his deep love for Lisa Marie and his growing sense of time pressing against him. He had begun to notice the toll that his lifestyle and career were taking on his health. He was still young, still admired, but he carried within him a quiet fear that life might not last as long as everyone believed. That fear was not for himself, but for his daughter. He wanted to know with certainty that she would be cared for and protected no matter what came. So while the papers looked like they contained only legal terms, they carried much more. They carried a father's heart, hidden in black and white lines, waiting for the day when the world would finally read them. It was not just a will, it was a message to Lisa Marie, sealed in the pages of law, prepared years before it would ever be opened. No one outside that small circle could guess what was waiting. To the public, Elvis was busy performing and living as a superstar. To his daughter, he was still the playful father who sang to her at Graceland. But quietly, behind the doors of his home, the king had written down instructions that would one day shock the world. And when those words were finally revealed, fans everywhere would realize that Elvis Presley was not only thinking of his music or his legacy, he was thinking of his little girl, the princess of his heart. Elvis's sudden death and the reading of the will. On the morning of August 16, 1977, the world was shaken by news no one wanted to believe. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was gone. At just 42 years old, he was found lifeless inside his beloved home, Graceland. The man whose voice had filled concert halls, whose smile had lit up television screens, and whose songs had given comfort to millions, had taken his final bow. The shock was instant and devastating. Fans who had followed his every move felt as though a part of their own hearts had been ripped away. Chaos followed almost immediately. Television stations interrupted programs, radio stations broke the news, and people poured into the streets in disbelief. Crowds rushed toward Graceland, hoping for answers, but finding only sorrow. It seemed impossible that someone so full of life could be gone in an instant. The mansion that had once echoed with music and laughter now stood heavy with silence and grief. Inside, family members clung to one another, struggling to grasp the reality that Elvis was no longer there to hold them. The days that followed were filled with mourning. Elvis's funeral was held at Graceland, where thousands of fans gathered outside the gates. They wept, they prayed, and they sang his songs through their tears. People had traveled from far and wide, some crossing oceans, just to say goodbye to the man who had changed music forever. The streets of Memphis filled with flowers, notes, and photographs left by grieving admirers. The world had lost more than an entertainer. It had lost a symbol of joy, rebellion, and hope. Behind those public displays of sorrow, quieter but equally heavy matters were unfolding inside Graceland. Lawyers were summoned. Family members sat together, their eyes red from days of tears. At the center of it all was Vernon Presley, Elvis's father. Heartbroken over losing his only son, Vernon now carried another painful duty. He was the executor of Elvis's will, the man chosen to oversee his estate and make sure his wishes were honored. It was a role filled with both responsibility and sorrow, as every word of the document reminded him of the son he had loved so dearly. The reading of the will was not a grand event filled with fanfare. It was a quiet, tense gathering where grief still hung in the air. Papers were unfolded, voices were steady but somber, and each line revealed how Elvis had chosen to divide the life he left behind. The family expected certain things: the mention of Graceland, the division of wealth, and the inclusion of those closest to him. But as the words moved forward, something different appeared. Buried within the will, carefully written and legally bound, was a special clause that no one had expected. It was not about the fame, not about the empire, not even about the music that had made him the king. It was about Lisa Marie Presley, his only daughter, and the center of his world. Elvis had left behind instructions that would protect her, guide her, and secure her future in ways no one could have predicted. The room fell silent as the words were read aloud. Even in his absence, Elvis's voice seemed to echo through those lines. His love for Lisa Marie was written into the very heart of the will. Family members listened with heavy hearts, realizing just how deeply Elvis had thought about the years ahead. Fans outside the gates would not know the full truth immediately, but when the details reached the public, the shock would ripple across the world once again. Elvis Presley had left the stage forever, but in his will, he had left something far more powerful than songs or riches. He had left a message of love and protection for his daughter, and it was this secret clause, hidden until that moment, that would keep Lisa Marie forever tied to the legacy of her father, the king, who had never stopped being her daddy. The secret clause, revealed when the will was finally read in full, the moment that many had waited for, arrived. Everyone expected the words to confirm what seemed obvious. Elvis Presley's estate, his fortune, and his beloved home would pass directly to his daughter, Lisa Marie Presley, or be shared among close family. But as the pages were carefully unfolded and the words spoken aloud, something unexpected appeared. There it was, hidden in the lines of legal writing, a decision that carried both surprise and deep meaning. Elvis had left the bulk of his estate, including Graceland, to Lisa Marie. Yet he added one important condition. Her inheritance would be locked away in a trust until she reached the age of 25. This detail shocked those who heard it. Lisa Marie had been only 9 years old when her father passed, and many believed she would have immediate control over his estate, perhaps with guidance from family members. Others thought the inheritance might be divided among relatives who had stood beside Elvis for years. But the king had chosen a different path. His decision placed Lisa Marie firmly at the center of his legacy, while also protecting her from the risks that could come with sudden wealth. Elvis understood better than most what fame could do. He had seen firsthand how success attracted people who were not always kind or honest. He knew the dangers that came when money fell into young hands too soon. By setting the age at 25, Elvis ensured that Lisa Marie would have time to grow, to learn, and to prepare for the enormous responsibility that came with being his only heir. It was not an act of withholding, but of love. He wanted his daughter to stand on her own feet before she carried the weight of his empire. To those sitting in that room, it was a bittersweet revelation. On one side, there was relief that Elvis had thought so carefully about Lisa Marie's future. On the other, There was sadness in realizing how much he had worried about what might happen after his passing. The decision carried the voice of a father who knew he could not always be there, yet refused to leave his daughter unprotected. It was as though Elvis had reached across time itself, his words echoing from beyond the grave, guiding Lisa Marie with the same tenderness he had shown when he held her as a child. Fans, when they finally learned of this clause, were stunned. Many could not understand at first why Elvis would delay his daughter's inheritance. Some questioned the choice, wondering why more family members had not been included. Others were puzzled by the idea of a trust, something that seemed distant and complicated compared to the simple love Elvis had always shown publicly. Yet as the years passed, understanding grew. People began to see the wisdom in his plan. Elvis had been protecting Lisa Marie in the only way he could after death. He had built a shield of time, giving her a chance to reach maturity before the burden of wealth came upon her. It was not only about money. Graceland itself, the home where Elvis had lived, laughed, and eventually taken his last breath, was part of this inheritance. By placing it in Lisa Marie's hands through the trust, Elvis ensured that his daughter would one day control the very heart of his legacy. Graceland was more than property. It was a symbol of who Elvis had been and what he had given to the world. To secure it for Lisa Marie meant that his story would remain tied to hers forever. In the end, the secret clause revealed more than just legal planning. It revealed the depth of a father's love, the careful thought of a man who, despite his fame, never forgot his most important role. Elvis had been a superstar, an icon, a legend, but in that will, in that single clause, he showed himself as something greater, a father who placed his daughter's safety and happiness above all else. When fans look back on that moment, they often speak of it with a mix of surprise and admiration. The king may have left the stage too soon, but through his will, his voice continued to guide Lisa Marie. It was as if he whispered softly from beyond, reminding her that she was never alone. The world had lost Elvis Presley the performer, but Lisa Marie had not lost Elvis the father. His words, locked in that clause, kept him by her side, shaping her path long after his final song had ended. Lisa Marie's journey with the will. When Elvis Presley passed away in August of 1977, Lisa Marie Presley was only 9 years old. At an age when most children are just beginning to understand the world, Lisa faced the unbearable loss of her father, the man who had sung to her at night, who had carried her through the halls of Graceland, and who had called her his princess, was suddenly gone. The weight of grief fell heavy on her small shoulders, and with it came something even greater, the knowledge that she was now the sole heir to the king of rock and roll's fortune. Her childhood was unlike that of any other child. She was surrounded by fame, not because of her own choices, but because of her father's towering legacy. Wherever she went, people recognized her name. Some saw her as the little girl Elvis had adored, while others looked at her as the heir to his empire. She could not escape the spotlight, even when she wanted nothing more than to live quietly. In the years after Elvis's passing, Lisa's life was shaped by two powerful forces: grief and the shadow of wealth. She lived with the pain of losing her father so young, while also being aware, though in ways she did not fully understand, that money and responsibility were waiting for her in the future. The will her father had written placed everything in a trust, guarded until she was old enough to handle it. That trust became both a promise and a mystery. It meant security, but it also meant waiting for a destiny she could not yet control. During her teenage years, Lisa tried to navigate a world that constantly reminded her of Elvis. Graceland became both a home and a museum, filled with the memory of the man who had once filled its halls with laughter. Visitors from across the globe came to see where the king had lived, and Lisa was reminded daily of who she was and what she represented. The trust remained in the background, always present, like a door she was not yet allowed to open. When she finally turned 25, the moment arrived. The trust that had been locked for so many years opened, and Lisa Marie inherited the full weight of her father's estate. It was more than money. It was Graceland. It was royalties. It was the Presley name itself. With the stroke of a pen, she became not just Elvis's daughter, but the guardian of everything he had left behind. Yet with this great inheritance came great drama. Managing an empire built on Elvis Presley's legacy was not simple. Every decision she made was watched by the public, and judged by fans who believed they had a claim to Elvis's memory. Lisa had to balance her personal life with the constant demands of running an estate that was both business and heritage. At times, she handled the responsibility with strength, making choices that preserved Graceland and kept her father's legacy alive. At other times, she struggled, facing financial troubles and personal challenges that made headlines. The fortune she inherited was not just a blessing, it was also a burden. With wealth came expectations, and with expectations came pressure. Being the only child of Elvis Presley meant living under a name that the entire world knew. People adored her father, and many expected Lisa to carry that torch without faltering. But she was human, with her own dreams, her own mistakes, and her own struggles. Her inheritance brought her comfort, but it also reminded her of the father she had lost. Every dollar, every piece of property, every decision connected her back to Elvis. The trust fund had protected her when she was too young, but once it was in her hands, the true weight of her inheritance became clear. It was not only about wealth, it was about carrying a legacy that millions cherished and millions judged. For Lisa Marie, the will was both a gift of love and a constant challenge. Her father had wanted to shield her, to make sure she had time to grow before facing the world with his empire in her hands. When she turned 25, that shield lifted, and she stepped into a role no one else on earth could ever understand. Her journey with the will showed both the beauty and the difficulty of being Elvis Presley's only child. She had the blessing of his love, written into the words of the trust. She had the honor of keeping Graceland and his memory alive, but she also carried the curse of being forever tied to a name so great that it sometimes left little room for her own identity. In the end, Lisa Marie's life with the will was a story of love, loss, and responsibility. It was the story of a daughter who received not just an inheritance of wealth, but an inheritance of weight. The will was her father's last message, a promise that she would be protected until she could stand on her own. Yet once she stood, she faced a world that expected her to carry the Presley name as gracefully as the king himself. That was the true journey, the blessing and the burden of being Elvis Presley's heir. The legacy of the secret clause. The secret clause in Elvis Presley's will would go on to shape not only Lisa Marie's life, but also the legacy of Graceland itself. When Elvis passed away in the summer of 1977, the world mourned the king, but tucked away inside his will was a plan that only a few people understood at first. By placing Graceland and the bulk of his fortune into a trust for Lisa Marie until she turned 25, Elvis made sure his daughter's future would be guarded. What seemed shocking at the time became the very reason Graceland still stands today as a global landmark. Instead of being sold off or divided, Graceland remained whole. It was not just a house, it was a place where millions would come to feel close to the man who changed music forever. Lisa Marie grew up knowing that her father's home would one day be hers, and when that moment finally arrived, she embraced the responsibility. Visitors walked through the gates of Graceland not only to remember Elvis, but also to witness the foresight of a father who had thought beyond his own lifetime. Lisa Marie carried the weight of that decision every day. The clause kept Graceland in the Presley name, and fans were endlessly thankful. Many believed Elvis must have sensed his time was shorter than anyone imagined. Perhaps he knew that fame could attract people eager to take advantage of his little girl. His choice to lock her inheritance away until she was old enough to make her own decisions seemed almost like a voice from beyond, guiding her toward a safer path. Yet the will could not shield her from life's storms. Lisa Marie faced struggles of her own. She endured marriages that ended, financial troubles that tested her strength, and the never-ending shadow of being Elvis Presley's only child. The world expected perfection, but behind the fame was a woman carrying the weight of a name loved by millions. The inheritance gave her Graceland, but it could not erase the grief of losing her father so young or the challenges that came with such great responsibility. Through it all, Lisa Marie preserved her father's memory with determination. She opened Graceland to the public, ensuring it was not only a family estate, but also a living museum of Elvis's life. Fans walked through the rooms, touched by the thought that Elvis's love for his daughter had kept this place alive. They saw proof that his will was more than just legal words. It was an act of protection, a father's way of reaching out from the grave to shape the future. The truth was bittersweet. Elvis's plan saved Graceland and safeguarded Lisa Marie's inheritance, but no plan could protect her from heartbreak. It was as if Elvis's hand reached out to steady her, yet even the king could not shield his daughter from every storm. The secret clause lived on as both a blessing and a reminder of the heavy crown Lisa Marie would forever wear as Elvis's heir. Elvis Presley's bond with his daughter Lisa Marie was unlike any other, and even in death he found a way to protect her. The secret clause in his will stunned everyone, locking her inheritance until she was old enough to carry it with strength. What seemed surprising then has become a symbol of his love and foresight. Fans still feel moved, knowing Elvis thought beyond his own life to safeguard his only child. Graceland stands today as proof of that choice, a home preserved because of a father's vision. Elvis may have left the stage in 1977, but through his will, his voice still speaks, forever protecting Lisa Marie, his only princess. And now we want to hear from you. What do you think about the will? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story so his voice keeps echoing long after the curtains close.